All right, ladies and gentlemen, chapter number 10. So, in the last chapter, we saw Freedom Summer, right? The push to try to get African American people registered to vote in the state of Mississippi, and how that led to a number of assaults, that led to a number of shootings, murders, beatings, etc. And then we get the ensuing investigation called Mississippi Burning, where the FBI conducted a investigation regarding the murder of 3 of the Freedom Summer workers. In chapter 10, we see a number of significant parts to the freedom, or the struggle for civil rights in the United States of America. So number 31, it says in 1964, LBJ President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. So in 1964, we finally see the American federal government take some significant action as far as civil rights are concerned. So it asks, what did the Civil Rights Act recognize? And basically, guys, the Civil Rights Act recognized full legal equality for all Americans, regardless of their skin shade. And it did 2 really important things. Number 1, it outlawed segregation, and then it also banned discrimination. So this was the first major piece of legislation passed by President Johnson regarding civil rights. A year later, in 1965, we see President Johnson pass something known as the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act basically outlawed any impediment to participating in America's democracy, such as poll taxes or literacy tests, which were very common in the American South to disenfranchise African American citizens, to make sure that they can't participate in the American democracy. So LBJ, despite the fact that he was a Southerner, he ends up doing the right thing. And you know what? Kudos to him for doing that. He took a lot of flack from Southerners for the fact that he was a man raised in the South, yet here he is dismantling the advantage that white people in the South had compared to those people who are African American. All right, now the Selma marches, 32, 33, and 34. We have some questions regarding Selma marches. So a young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot in Selma, Alabama, and he was shot by state police. After that happened, it was decided that there was going to be a march, a protest from Selma to the capital of Montgomery, Alabama. And this was on March 7th, 1965. So with the march, a number of civil rights supporters came together, and they were going to go from Selma, about 50 miles down the road, to the state capital of Montgomery. Now, on March the 7th, 1965, when the march started, state police stopped the marchers, and the marchers were told that it was an unlawful assembly. I have a video up above that shows the hellish scene that happened on that day. So that event today, guys, is known as Bloody Sunday. So on a March the 7th was a Sunday, and it's where all hell broke loose once again in the civil rights movement. If you remember the scenes from Birmingham where the children walked out in protest after Dr. King and other prominent leaders were put in jail in the city of Birmingham by Eugene Bull Connor, this was another hellish scene. Forever in my memory are the scenes of billy clubs and tear gas and horses and stuff like that. And one young lady was actually beaten unconscious on March the 7th. Now, the next day, there was a second march that happened. And this time, Dr. King, because he was told by a court injunction that he can't march to Montgomery, he actually had the protesters come back to a church. And then that night, a young man by the name of James Reeb was lynched by a group of white supremacists. Just so you know, James Reeb was a white man, and again, his picture is up above, and he was murdered by these racists who did not like seeing a white man giving support to the civil rights movement. Now, it says, how is Selma a significant place in the civil rights movement for number 32? Well, that's where this eventually we see a massive march that occurs. So we have March 7th, right, Bloody Sunday. March 8th, a second protest that then is turned around by Dr. King to a church based on a court injunction. And then later on, after the murder of James Reeb, we see a third march from Selma to Montgomery. Now, this time the state governor, he had heard that there was going to be another march, right? Dr. King said something to the effect of, we have absolutely no choice but to move forward, right? If we stop now, the movement is dead. So they have another march, and it begins on March the 21st. The state governor of Alabama did not give any protection to the marchers, and because of that, President Johnson, LBJ, actually federalized the Alabama National Guard and gave protection to the marchers. So on March the 21st, 1965, 8,000 marchers started the 50-mile trek, which originally was supposed to be on March the 7th. So on the 21st, they start that 50-mile trek from Selma to Montgomery. The trek takes 4 days. They arrive at the state capitol on the 25th of March, 1965. And while they are walking from Selma to Montgomery, the crowd continually got larger and larger. And by the time it got to the state capitol in Montgomery, it was 25,000 people who had joined Dr. King and ended up showing a massive display of support for the civil rights agenda. Now, at this protest, right, when they finally got to Montgomery, Dr. King gives his iconic speech called How Long, Not Long. And I posted that speech up above for you guys to hear it as well. Every time I hear speeches from Dr. King, it just reminds me of what a brilliant human being, what a compassionate, kind, just generally good soul he was, and how we need more people like Dr. King. So number 33 says on March 7th, 1965, over 500 protesters marched from Selma to the state capital, Montgomery. What resistance did they encounter? Well, that was the state police who stopped them. Again, this is an unlawful assembly, and they ended up beating many of these people. And then, of course, the march was dispersed. And then number 34, how did MLK and other civil rights activists respond to the events of Bloody Sunday? Well, we get that second march, but more importantly, we get that big one on the 21st of March, 1965, from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital. 8,000 people turns to 25,000. And of course, we get the iconic How Long, Not Long speech from Dr. King. So, yeah, that is it for chapter 10. Hopefully you guys are learning some stuff here. This is not happy history, but things are getting better, right? We're seeing positive things happening here in the civil rights movement. And I'll see you again in chapter number 11. Peace. I love you guys as always, and we'll see you soon.